You're standing in a room full of people who think they are in charge and none of them see you coming. Not because you're hiding, not because you're whispering in shadows, but because you've learned the oldest trick in the game. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it slips in through the cracks of routine, through the silence between decisions, through the unguarded moments when everyone's too busy managing appearances to notice who's actually rearranging the furniture. This isn't about coups or speeches or dramatic betrayals. This is about acquisitions so quiet, so seamless, that by the time anyone realizes what's happened, you're not the threat. You're the solution. And Machiavelli, he didn't just hint at this. He mapped it. Not in the loud chapters everyone quotes, but in the margins, in the pauses between his warnings, in the spaces where he lets you fill in the blanks, because he knew if you're sharp enough to read between the lines, you're sharp enough to execute without permission. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you watched someone rise without fanfare? Not the kind who storms the stage with charisma and demands attention, but the one who simply ends up seated at the head of the table one day, and no one can quite remember when that started happening. That's not luck. That's not accident. That's silent acquisition. And it's not reserved for kings or CEOs or revolutionaries. It's available to anyone who understands that power isn't taken. It's absorbed, like water into soil. Slow, quiet, inevitable. You don't need a title to begin acting like you own the room. You need presence. Not the loud kind, the gravitational kind, the kind that doesn't ask for space. It creates it by existing. Think of it like this. Most people treat power like a crown, something you wear, something visible, something you have to be handed. Machiavelli saw it differently. He saw it as a current, invisible, moving beneath the surface, shaping everything it touches without ever breaking the water. You don't grab the current, you learn to swim with it. Better yet, you learn to redirect it. And the most dangerous part, no one sees the redirection until the river's already changed course. That's the art. That's the rule. Silent acquisition isn't about force, it's about frequency. Showing up consistently where decisions are made. Not to argue, not to impress, but to become part of the rhythm. The person who's always there when problems arise. Who offers solutions without needing credit. Who doesn't react to drama, but quietly resolves it. That's the one who ends up holding the keys not because they demanded them, because no one else remembered where they were kept. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are terrified of stepping into that space. Not because they lack ambition, but because they've been conditioned to wait for permission, to wait for the nod, the title, the official invitation. But Machiavelli, he didn't believe in waiting, he believed in positioning. You don't ask to be trusted. You engineer situations where trust becomes the only logical option. You don't beg for influence, you create dependencies. So subtle, so natural that removing you would feel like removing a load-bearing wall, and you do it without fanfare, without speeches, without announcing your intentions. Because the moment you declare your ambition, you become a target. The moment you stay quiet, you become a fixture. Let me give you a real-world texture to this. Not some dusty historical anecdote you've heard 100 times, but something you can feel in your bones. Imagine you're working in an office. Any office, doesn't matter the industry. There's a project that's floundering. Everyone's talking about it. Meetings are happening. Fingers are being pointed. And in walks someone not the boss, not the loudest voice, who simply says, "I'll handle the client's side." And then disappears for 2 days, comes back with revised timelines, adjusted deliverables, and a calm assurance that everything's under control. No grandstanding, no "look what I did," just results. And suddenly, when the next crisis hits, guess who everyone looks to? Not the person with the title, the person who solved the last one. That's silent acquisition. You didn't ask to lead. You didn't campaign for it. You became indispensable by solving what no one else wanted to touch, and you did it without making it about you. This is where most people fail. They think acquisition means visibility. They think they need to be seen, heard, recognized. But Machiavelli knew the louder you are, the more resistance you create. The quieter you are, the more space you occupy. Because silence isn't empty. It's strategic. It's the space where assumptions are formed, where reputations are built without your direct involvement. When you're not the one shouting about your contributions, others start shouting for you, and that's infinitely more powerful. A reputation built by others is armor. A reputation you build yourself, that's a target. And here's the twist. This isn't manipulation in the cheap sense. It's not about tricking people. It's about understanding human nature so deeply that you position yourself where you're needed before anyone realizes they need you. It's about reading the room, not for ego, but for opportunity. Where is the friction? Where is the gap? Where is the unspoken tension no one wants to address? That's your opening. Not to exploit, but to resolve. And in resolving, you embed yourself. You become the solution. And solutions, they don't get replaced. They get relied upon. You might be thinking, this sounds passive. It's not. It's intensely active, just invisibly so. It's choosing your moments with surgical precision. It's knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the work. It's building alliances, not through flattery, but through reliability. It's becoming the person others whisper about in hallways. Have you asked them yet? Not because you demanded it, but because you made yourself the obvious answer. That's the magic. That's the rule. You don't seize power by force. You let it gravitate toward you by becoming the only stable point in a room full of spinning plates. And the beautiful, terrifying part, this works anywhere. In boardrooms, in friend groups, in creative collaborations, in families, in online communities. Power isn't location dependent. It's behavior dependent. The person who consistently shows up with clarity, calm, and competence without needing applause is the one who ends up steering the ship, not because they grabbed the wheel, because everyone else willingly handed it over, and they didn't even realize they did it. So, here's your first move. Stop asking for permission. Stop waiting for the green light. Start identifying the silent gaps around you, the things that need doing, the tensions that need easing, the questions no one's answering, and fill them quietly, consistently, without fanfare. Let your actions echo louder than your words ever could. And watch, not with impatience, but with patience as the room begins to rearrange itself around you. Not because you forced it, because you became inevitable. And if you think this is just theory, if you think this is just clever wordplay, wait. Because what you've just heard, that's only the surface. The real mechanics, the psychological triggers, the timing, the misdirection, the art of making people believe the power was always yours. That's where things get dangerous. That's where things get real. And you're not ready for that yet. Not until you've mastered the silence. Not until you've learned to move without shaking the floor. So breathe, observe, position, and when the moment comes, and it will, you won't need to announce yourself. They'll already know you're in charge. You think you've seen how power moves, but you haven't. Not really, because what most people mistake for power is just noise dressed up as authority. The yelling, the titles, the performative confidence, that's not control. That's theater, real power. It doesn't announce its arrival. It doesn't need to. It's already seated at the table before the meeting starts. It's already shaped the agenda before anyone walks in. And the person holding it, they're not the one speaking the loudest. They're the one everyone turns to after the shouting stops. That dice silent acquisition, not a takeover, an absorption, a slow, patient infiltration of influence so complete that by the time anyone notices, reversing it would break everything. Machiavelli didn't write about this in bold letters. He buried it between warnings and hypotheticals because he knew if you're sharp enough to catch it, you're dangerous enough to use it. He understood something most strategists ignore. People don't resist what they don't perceive as a threat. So don't be a threat. Be a relief. Be the calm in the chaos. Be the hand that steadies the ship without ever grabbing the wheel. That's how you take control without ever asking. That's how you make them grateful you're there, even as you quietly reshape the rules of the game. Let's get practical, not theoretical, not philosophical, not some recycled quote from Chapter 5. I'm talking about the kind of move you can make tomorrow. Say you're in a group, could be coworkers, friends, collaborators, and there's tension around a decision. Everyone's arguing, no consensus, deadlock. Most people jump in with opinions trying to win the room. You wait, you let the noise peak. Then when exhaustion sets in, you offer not a solution, but a framework. What if we broke this into 3 phases? Or what's the one thing we all agree on right now? You don't position yourself as the answer. You position yourself as the structure. And structures, they're not debated, they're used. Suddenly you're not leading, you're enabling. And enabling is the most powerful form of leadership because no one resents it. They thank you for it. While they're busy feeling heard, you're busy defining the boundaries of what's possible. That's not manipulation, that's architecture. And here's where it gets deeper. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. You need to be the most observant. Watch how decisions actually get made, not how they're supposed to be made, how they really are. Who defers to whom? Who interrupts without consequence? Who speaks last? That's your map. That's your blueprint. Silent acquisition isn't about overpowering the system. It's about understanding its hidden wiring and gently rerouting the current. You don't fight the hierarchy. You bypass it by becoming essential to its function. The assistant who knows where every file is, who remembers every deadline, who anticipates every misstep. They don't need a promotion to run the show, they already do. And the higher-ups, they'll defend them fiercely, not out of loyalty, but out of self-preservation. Remove that person and the whole machine grinds to a halt. That's not dependence, that's dominance disguised as service. This is why Machiavelli never wasted time on brute force. He knew overt grabs for power trigger resistance. Silent acquisition, it triggers gratitude. You solve a problem no one else wants to touch. The tedious logistics, the awkward conversations, the unglamorous grunt work, and suddenly, you're not the underdog. You're the linchpin. And linchpins don't ask for raises. They don't campaign for promotions. They get offered them because letting them walk away is unthinkable. That's the goal. Make your presence so woven into the fabric of the operation that removing you feels like unraveling the whole thing. And you do it without ever saying, "I'm indispensable." You let them say it for you in hushed tones, in urgent emails, in panicked whispers when you're out sick. That's when you know you've won. Not when they applaud you, when they panic without you. But here's the trap most fall into. They confuse silence with passivity. Big mistake. Silent acquisition is not waiting. It's hunting. It's scanning the environment for friction points and slipping into them like water finding cracks in stone. You're not idle. You're calculating. Every interaction, every task, every moment of downtime, you're asking, where is the gap? Where is the assumption? Where is the unspoken rule that, if shifted slightly, changes everything? That's your playground. That's your leverage. And you don't need permission to play there. You just need awareness and nerve. Let me give you a texture you can feel. Imagine you're part of a creative team. Ideas are flying. Egos are clashing. Deadlines loom. Everyone's focused on the big picture, the vision, the brand, the splashy launch. You notice no one's tracking version control. No one's syncing feedback. No one's making sure the designer has the copywriter's latest draft. So you start doing it quietly without fanfare. You build a shared folder. You send gentle reminders. You become the invisible glue. 3 weeks later, when the client asks for revision history and everyone freezes, you have it organized, clean, instant. Suddenly, you're not just the junior designer or the quiet intern. You're the operational backbone. And guess what? When the next project kicks off, who do they put in charge of workflow? Not the loudest voice, the one who kept the train from derailing. That's silent acquisition. You didn't campaign, you didn't negotiate. You became unavoidable. And the real kicker, this scales. It works whether you're dealing with 3 people or 300, whether you're in a startup or a century-old institution. Power doesn't care about size, it cares about necessity. Become necessary, and titles become irrelevant. You don't need to be CEO to steer the company. You need to be the one who knows which levers to pull when the engine sputters. You don't need to be the charismatic founder to shape culture. You need to be the one who models the behavior everyone unconsciously copies. Influence isn't about volume. It's about consistency. It's about showing up day after day, solving what others ignore until your way becomes the default. And defaults, They're rarely questioned. They're just followed. Now let's talk about timing, because this isn't a slow burn forever. There comes a moment, and you'll feel it in your gut, when the foundation you've laid is solid enough to bear weight. That's when you stop being the fixer and start being the architect. You don't announce the shift. You demonstrate it. You take a small decision, something low risk but visible, and you handle it not as a task, but as a precedent. You don't ask for input. You present the path forward as if it's already agreed upon. Here's how we'll proceed. Not what do you think we should do. Subtle. Yes. Powerful. Immensely. Because language shapes reality. And when you speak from a place of assumed authority, others assume it too. That's not arrogance. That's calibration. You've earned the space. Now you claim it, not with a declaration, but with a tone. And Machiavelli, he'd smile at this. Not because it's cruel, because it's efficient. He knew humans follow patterns more than principles. If you become the pattern, the reliable rhythm beneath the noise, you don't need to convince anyone of your value. They feel it. They rely on it. They protect it. And that's when true power crystallizes. Not in titles, not in speeches, but in the unspoken certainty that things simply work better when you're involved. That's the end game. That's the rule. You don't seize power. You make it impossible to function without you. And you do it so quietly, so gracefully that no one even realizes they've handed you the keys until they try to take them back and discover there's nothing left to unlock. But don't get comfortable, because the moment you think you've arrived is the moment you become vulnerable. Silent acquisition isn't a destination. It's a discipline. It requires constant recalibration, constant observation, constant restraint. The second you start believing your own myth, you become the noise. And noise gets tuned out. Stay fluid, stay quiet, stay essential, and above all, stay underestimated. That's where the real power lives, in the space between what people see and what you're actually building. And if you think you've grasped the full scope of this, you haven't. Not yet. Because what comes next? That's where the illusion of control gets dismantled. That's where you learn to wield absence as a weapon to make them miss you before you're even gone. To turn your silence into gravity. But that's not for now. That's for when you've mastered the art of being everywhere without ever demanding attention. So keep watching, keep positioning, keep solving what no one else will. And when the ground shifts beneath everyone's feet, you won't stumble. You'll be the one holding it together quietly, effortlessly, irreplaceably, undefined. They'll never see it coming. Not because you're hiding, but because you've made yourself so ordinary in their eyes that your absence feels like an earthquake. That's the final layer. That's the apex of silent acquisition. You don't win by being the most visible. You win by becoming the atmosphere unnoticed until it's gone, and then suddenly desperately missed. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. The most enduring power isn't the kind that roars. It's the kind that breathes, quiet, constant, unremarkable, until its removal collapses the entire structure. And that's not something you declare. It's something you engineer slowly, patiently, ruthlessly. Let's cut through the fluff. This isn't about playing nice or waiting your turn. This is about strategic invisibility, about letting them believe they are in control while you're the one calibrating the dials behind the curtain. You don't need to sit at the head of the table. You need to be the reason the table doesn't tip over. And the moment you master that, the moment you learn to vanish without leaving, to recede without surrendering, you become untouchable. Because how do you fight someone who isn't there to fight? How do you replace someone who never claimed to be irreplaceable? You don't. You cannot. And that's the point. Here's how it works. You start small. You pick a responsibility, a function, a rhythm that no one else wants to own. Not because it's beneath you, because it's invisible. The scheduling, the follow-ups, the documentation, the tiny, tedious things that keep the gears turning but never get applause. You take them on, not with resentment, not with martyrdom, with quiet precision. You do them so well, so consistently, that they become synonymous with your presence. And then this is critical. You begin to subtly detach your name from them. You stop saying, "I handled that." You start saying, "It's taken care of." You remove yourself from the credit loop. Why? Because when people stop associating the task with you, they stop seeing you as optional. They start seeing the task as automatic. And when the task is automatic and you're the one who built the automation, you've just embedded yourself into the system's DNA. No one questions DNA. They just rely on it. And then you pull back. Not all at once. Not dramatically, just less. You let a deadline slip by half a day. You don't jump in to fix the miscommunication. You wait just long enough for someone to notice. Just long enough for the first email to go unanswered. Just long enough for the silence to start itching. That's when the magic happens. Not when you're solving everything, when you're solving nothing. Because in that vacuum, they start to feel the weight of what you've been carrying. They start to realize how much friction you've been absorbing. And they don't resent you for stepping back. They panic. They reach out. They apologize. They beg you to come back. Not because you demanded it, because you made them feel the cost of your absence. That's not manipulation. That's calibration. You're not punishing them. You're teaching them. Teaching them what happens when the silent engine stops humming. This is where most people flinch. They think pulling back is risky. They think it'll make them seem unreliable. But Machiavelli would laugh at that fear. He knew true power isn't proven in presence. It's proven in absence. Anyone can be useful when they're visible. The real test: can you make them feel lost when you're not? That's the threshold. Cross it and you're no longer an employee, a colleague, a friend. You're infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't negotiate. It doesn't campaign. It doesn't beg. It simply exists. And the world rearranges itself to accommodate it. Let me give you something you can taste. Imagine you're the one who always organizes the team off-sites. Not because you love planning parties, but because no one else will. You handle the invites, the venues, the dietary restrictions, the agendas. You do it quietly, no fanfare. 1 month you say you're swamped. You ask someone else to take point. They fumble. Dates get double booked. Dietary needs are ignored. The agenda is a mess. The event limps along, and afterward everyone's grateful it's over and quietly relieved when you say, "I'll handle the next one." No one asks you to. No one has to. They volunteer you because you've shown them the cost of life without you. And that's the goal. Not to be praised, to be presumed. Now scale that. Scale it to budgets, to client relationships, to crisis protocols, to creative direction, to culture, to trust. The principle doesn't change. You embed, you enable, you withdraw just enough. You let the cracks show, and then you step back in, not as a savior but as a given. Oh, good. You're handling it. That's the phrase you're hunting for. Not thank you, not great job. Oh, good. You're handling it. That's surrender. That's submission. That's silent acquisition in its purest form. They're not giving you power. They're admitting you already have it. And here's the brutal elegance of it. You never have to say a word about it. Not ever. You don't need to remind them. You don't need to document your contributions. You don't need to keep score because the system itself becomes your ledger. The smoother things run with you, the louder the silence screams when you're gone. And the louder that silence screams, the more they'll do to keep you close. Not out of loyalty, but out of self-interest. And that's the most durable kind of loyalty there is. But, and this is where most fail, you can't get greedy. You can't start flexing. You can't start making demands the moment you feel your leverage. That's when you become visible again. That's when you become a target. Silent acquisition only works as long as you remain frictionless. The moment you turn your indispensability into a weapon, you break the spell. You become the problem instead of the solution. So you stay calm. You stay quiet. You stay generous even as you're holding all the cards. Because generosity from a position of power, that's not weakness. That's dominance. That's the kind of control that doesn't need enforcement. It just is. Machiavelli didn't write about this in chapters. He wrote about it in glances, in pauses, in the spaces between the lines where he lets you connect the dots. Because if you're sharp enough to see them, you're sharp enough to use them. He knew power isn't about force. It's about frequency, about showing up where it matters, solving what no one else will, and then when the time is right, Stepping back just far enough to let them feel the void, not to punish, to teach, to recalibrate, to remind them gently, silently, that the world spins smoother when you're at the center. And if you think this is the end, it's not. This is just the rhythm, the pulse, the quiet machinery beneath everything you'll ever build. Because power isn't seized, it's absorbed, it's woven.